The silence when she sat on the high end of the table had reached a point where it was almost unbearable. The new gown suited her well, as did the crown she wore until having seated herself on a lonely banquet in the honor of her ascending to the throne as queen. Her scaled face was flooded with melancholy, sadness, and hints of a deep depression. To her, a loss had occurred, that of a man who had played a central role in her path, and now he was gone. She wept for him, even though she knew he had gotten what he deserved. Only a meter to her left sat the man the other one's life had been traded for, and she was unsure if it had been the right decision. The man looked at his own crossed hands. His muttering words of encouragement had faded away the same way the color had drained out of his hair. "Would you like something to eat?" she carefully asked through the emptiness in between them. He shook his head. "I don't feel hungry, though I appreciate the gesture." The man heard the noise of her dangling feet hitting the ground from time to time. It got on his nerves, but he didn't say a word. "How is she doing?" The young queen proceeded to talk. His fingers tightened. Nothing changed. No pulse, no breath. She feels cold. "Don't you think it's time to—" He immediately interrupted. "No, she will wake up eventually. She always did." She took a moment of time before replying. "But what if that was it? What if that was her last action?" She said she would be capable of fulfilling every demand. One single action can't take her out. The dining room fell back into silence. There were no guards close by, but he knew they were in reach just a little further down the rooms. It was dark outside. Raindrops were hammering against the glass. Gradually even hail came down. January really wanted to end with a spectacle. "What will you do after she wakes up?" she continued asking, not realizing how it got onto the other one's nerves. "What am I supposed to do? I can't plan in advance for a person who could either fall into a deep depression or manic outburst of rage and laughter. I'll just have to see and pray to act accordingly," he replied with a sigh. He hadn't thought much about it. In general, he preferred to push away the thought of interacting with the dead person again, even though that corpse meant a lot to him. Instead, he had gone right back into working, ignoring the countless questions shooting down at him. "Isn't it time to—" He interrupted her mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, Queen Alba, but I have to get back to the others. Have a nice meal." In truth, he didn't go back. He immediately took the stairs to go upwards to the highest level, where he then followed his old corridor to one of the last doors in the hall. With the same old key, he opened and closed the door, stepping into the room with the bed in the back left corner, the desk without a chair before the window just underneath the roof, and a chest on its right. It had become his routine to brush off his shoes, kneel on the bed, and observe what was before him. The hybrid was laying on his right side, hands tightly tied together by the robe and a blue cape in between arms and rest of the body. His eyes were closed, and so was his mouth. The dripping of liquid from his body had stopped after the first few days, and since then everything had stayed as clean as the other one had left it. The armor had been taken off and laid next to the door on the same pile as the bloody cloth from about 2 months ago, so Avery was laying there only in his blood-stained blue uniform, blouse and trousers. A blanket covered his lower half. The upper half had stayed untouched because the single wing left looked as if it could break once more at even the slightest touch. The stitches didn't heal. The wounds on his head didn't heal. The bullet wound through his neck didn't heal. The one kneeling next to the body let his grayish-blue fingers glide through the silver and black hair to push a streak or two out of the knight's face. The skin was as cold as the doorknob of the room. Dew wanted to kiss his partner's face, but didn't know if it was the right thing to do. Then he laid there, sometimes for hours, staring at the either sleeping or dead face, hoping for a single movement. Just a weak breath could give him comfort, but it was always for nothing, and day by day he asked himself the question Alba had wanted to ask him at the table. Isn't it time to bury him? Isn't it time to move on? He had already found an answer for himself. He wouldn't declare his partner to be gone forever until 1 full month passed. Only half the time was up. Dew took his own blanket and wrapped himself in it. Then he laid down on a pillow, his face turned towards the other person, and began to sleep. When Josephine knocked, it was already the next morning. She wore the same dark dress as before, with a shawl in a similar shade hanging from her shoulders. Her hair was tied into a tight bun, but several strands had already loosened. "How are you today?" her hoarse voice whispered, her lips trying to fake a smile. Josephine already knew how he was feeling. The question was nothing more than a polite way to start a conversation. "Did your sister already take the child?" Du got straight to his subject of interest. "Yes, she came yesterday. Thank you again for telling her." He simply nodded and hinted to her with a movement to step out of the door and let him through. Together they walked along the corridor, down the stairs and into the direction of the garden. Du threw the cape over his shoulders and put on the hood while walking. His white hair fell into his face, which still showed strong signs of the bruising the slap by the guard had left. Hands, neck and every single finger were covered up. Sean's wife had lent Du a pair of her white servant gloves because they had a similar hand size, but there was nothing he could do about his face. It didn't matter much, though, because he spent most of his time in his room, the kitchen, with Alba in one of her countless chambers, of whom rarely anyone was specifically guarded, or in the garden with Josephine by his side. The woman considered the flowers to be comforting, and even though he didn't agree, Du preferred the area over every other place outside the castle. As soon as he stepped outside, he got goosebumps. After several minutes in the early morning air, both his shoes and lower trousers, as well as the face and cape, became wet because of the thin fog which covered the large land like a veil. There was no need to say a word while they crossed past the thick bushes of greyish-green and blue plants. They split up before the cathedral. She went inside, while Du kept on going towards the edge, where he would wait until she was done with her prayers. The last time he had seen the statue, it hadn't been that of a woman in uniform, with a claymore in one hand and an arm stretched out to the ceiling with a crown. It had displayed that of a different person, one with long and wavy hair, restfully closed eyes, and a mild smile instead of a stoic but cold expression. The statue had large and pointy ears and a pair of sharp wings like a phoenix. A bouquet of rose and starflowers were in its elegant hands. The clothing was that of what Du assumed a fairy would wear, a veil over the shoulders, a gentle dress, and no shoes. The new statue had appeared out of nowhere. The old one was nowhere to be found, but Alba immediately claimed it to be a different god, one that replaced the old one who had ruled for thousands of years. She called the new one by the name Arv, and commented to respect her as the new patron of the kingdom. And Josephine did as the queen had pleased, and found great comfort in the presence of the statue. Du pitied the woman. He despised himself for having been the way he had been to her before having been declared dead. The message had arrived 3 days ago, early in the morning, but it had happened before the arrival of the next day. Now Josephine was praying for his soul and her own soul to rest, his in his next life, and for herself to go through the grieving and come out stronger than before. Compared to Josephine, Du had a glimpse of hope. Patrick was dead, and he couldn't come back. He had had a life, and it had been taken from him as an aftermath of his injuries. It hadn't been unforeseen but unexpected. For so long it had seemed as if the knight was recovering well. He had been outside of the hospital pretty soon, and had moved back in with his wife and child. Josephine had been overjoyed until he suddenly had gotten back to be treated, and it turned out he couldn't be saved by the nurses. Maybe Avery would have healed him if he had been conscious and well. Staring down at the sad treetops and vague forms of the city which were surrounded by silver clouds, Du waited for Josephine's arrival. The low wall he was leaning on lacked the comfort of warmth and the little shade it could provide from spring to summer. He wished for the season to change quickly, even though the gloves his fingers were frozen and he missed the sun. It was almost unreal to him that in a couple of months he would be married for 1 year already. That was unless Avery would not wake up anymore. For Josephine it had been between 5 to 10 years. Du had forgotten the numbers, and all he remembered was when he had found out she was married during his first year at the castle. His little self had been completely overwhelmed by the strict routine he had suddenly had to follow. During that time she had helped him the most, and he believed for some time that he had developed feelings for her. Learning about her anonymous husband had put him to shame. Thinking back to it, he could only laugh at the scenario. Josephine had always been a mixture of a sister and grandmother to him. He knew it, even though he had never experienced that kind of family dynamic. Concerning the first 4 years, Stu couldn't tell whether he wanted to go back to them or stay in this reality. Of course, it was better to be in a somewhat superior role inside a job due to experience. It was also comfortable not to have a 4-armed woman behind him who saw him as a simple target for her selfish longings. Even better was the fact that barely anyone called him slurs anymore due to rumors, though they had been true in their core. Still, he would rather go back to not being a Merling, not being a conscious murderer, not being chased by an insane boar, and to be happy through nothing with life itself. He even somewhat regretted having married or gotten with the other person in general, not because he didn't love him anymore, but because it had put both of them into some of their worst experiences. And perhaps it was true and Avery didn't love him. Not like that, at least. The woman in black stepped beside him. "I loved the view during the winters. I just wish it wasn't that cold," she sniffed, her nose running again, but not due to tears this time. He simply nodded without turning to face her. In the end, he did so anyway because an object in her hand caught his attention. "Where did you get that from?" Josephine lifted up the flower with the thorns on its stem and many red layers of petals and explained, "Oh, that. I just opened my eyes after having finished my prayers, and there it was. It's so cliché, but it is a lovely flower. I will put it in a vase after moving to my new room." "You're moving? Where?" "As a single woman, but as a mother, I will have to leave the old place and receive one similar to the one you and your wife have. I hope it won't take me long to get back into shape. I don't want little Anna to grow up without me for longer than 2 weeks. Dew gazed back at the area beneath him and sighed. "You will, definitely. And he is my husband. Please refer to him that way." She nodded, even though she couldn't understand, and followed his eyes. On the inside, Dew wanted to go down there, move a little and get distracted by all sorts of conversations, smells and offers, but he was terrified and no amount of wanted posters or knights on the walls could comfort him. Only a one-person company could. "I really want to ask you something." Josephine got him out of his thoughts. "What will you do next? You have no reason to stay here since the king is dead." "If he lives, I'll live as well, and we'll continue our search if he can. If he dies, I will probably die shortly after while continuing the search by myself. How it will happen will solely depend on the situation." "And there's no way for you to simply stay here?" she wanted to know. Dew shook his head in response. "I can't stand this place anymore, and I'm sure he won't either." Josephine turned her head even further down, watching the rock under her elbows. "So then it's settled. You will leave and will never return. We'll never see each other again. You know what? I'll name my next child after you." The comment came so surprisingly Dew couldn't help himself but laugh. The woman put her hands on her hips and exclaimed, "It's true, I will. Just give me 9 months." He choked on his own spit. "Already?" "Well, Patrick can't object how I name our second child, can he?" Dew would have paid for someone to give him a mirror to see his own face. It must have looked perfectly disturbed. The day passed like every single other. He did his job, stayed with Alba, stared out of one of the many tall windows in either her chamber or in one of the entertainment rooms. There was nothing remarkably interesting or fun or exciting about any activity he could commit to. At some point Alba had to leave to attend to whatever new rulers had to do. Perhaps she was planning her marriage, which was waiting for her. Maybe she was dealing with the extremist situations all over the kingdom because she didn't hesitate to act on behalf of the suppressed hybrids and suspected it to be a successful mission in at least a year. All of that didn't matter much to Dew. He wasn't affected because she never talked about justice for Merlings. To her they didn't exist. It would be a miracle if she had ever even heard of them outside of a fairy tale book in which everything seemed to be made up. And it wasn't like they would continue to exist for much longer. Dew didn't want to believe it. Every part of him rejected the thought except a little bit of logical thinking which wasn't corrupted by emotion. Avery was dead. Jonah had set it to Dew's face, had persecuted the corpse to force whatever was reanimating it outside or drain it. Maybe Avery had recovered last time after an hour or two of staying without a breath or pulse. Maybe he had made it a couple more hours after being found on the battlefield after whatever Jonah had done to him. But it had been around 14 days now. The king had shot a bullet straight through the hybrid's neck until it came out the other side, while a sword pierced his old heart. And Dew had held his lover in his palms, which had been bleeding from a gash created by the very same sword that Avery had swung around to change targets. That had been his last action, and Dew was grieving. He was grieving enough to keep a corpse on his bed with the hands tied up as if it could wake up and decide to harm itself. He had bothered to brush the hybrid's hair once in a while, clean up the bleeding wounds until normal fluid came out to clean, and to stare at the bruising on the grey face and the gashes for so long it appeared in his dreams as if they were his own. At least he couldn't weep any more. Like the night before, Dew didn't appear to end his shift, which had already been spoken about with Frederick, who showed great understanding towards Dew's situation. His chef's soft side was one he had never guessed he would be allowed to see. He didn't even know it had existed in the first place. But maybe it had been exactly that which had the past queen, Rufus II, and Sean developed such high sympathies towards him. And he did the same, even if he was unable to express his gratitude towards the old man. He went up the stairs and along the corridor like he had done so many times. He knew this action would have its last time soon, maybe in a month or a week or even tomorrow, if he were to succumb to the realization that his partner was indeed dead. Dew stood before the door and remembered his first time as a boy, where he had learned that this would be his own space for once, one with warmth and privacy and Avery. And he remembered many other times, like when he had eavesdropped on the conversation between Jonah and Avery, had waited for Avery to confess to what he had believed to be his sins, and listened for the sound of metal hitting stone or wood to announce the blind man's approach. At last he opened the door and closed it behind him. The joints were shrieking, the wood was creaking as always after decades of use. Dew was prepared to sink into his bed, to fall into a sleep of fever dreams or suffocating numbness, but almost dropped to the ground as a pair of muddy green eyes was staring at him.